My boss is terrible, period, I gotta punctuate it. I said I loved your shirt, but behind your back I said I hate it. May lightning strike me down if I lied, may no one be around when my tongue's untied. Everybody says it's okay, all the little things I say with my big fat mouth. La 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 la. With my big fat mouth.
My big fat mouth gets me in trouble.
Just say the title out loud together. Can we do that on three? 1, 2, 3. My big fat mouth. Yeah, you guys have said something like that in your lifetime before. Me and my big fat mouth. Let's do it one more time together. You ready on 3? 1, 2, 3. My big fat mouth. And so as we dive into this series, there's something here that I need you to grab right out the gate. And it's this word right here. No, not this one. Go back one. It's this word right here, this idea of my. This is my big fat mouth, okay? And so I'm talking to me, but guess what? I'm talking to you today too. Guess who this is not for in this moment? This is about you and your big mouth, my big mouth. This isn't about my husband's big mouth. I mean, because I see some of you already like, okay, pay attention. I'm glad you're here today. This is going to be about my husband's big fat mouth. This isn't about your wife's big fat mouth. Gentlemen, you know better than to elbow her about that, right? Because you would pay for that later. This isn't about your kid's big fat mouth or your boss's big fat mouth. And I heard the video talking about their boss. Please don't talk about your boss that way. It will land you into some trouble and get yourself fired. And so this morning, as we begin to dive into this idea, is that our mouths can get us into trouble, right? Our big fat mouth, when we open it up, sometimes there are things that come out that land us in trouble. And we've all had those moments where we do something like this, where we put our foot in our mouth. Any of you ever done that before? Okay, don't leave me hanging up here today. I know I'm not by myself. I have chewed on some toes in my day, right? My own toes, nobody else's toes, just to clarify in case you're wondering today, all right? So the reality is that God has given us a unique gift. He's given us a button. He's given us a pause button. He's given us the ability to hit pause, to call time out, and to think before we speak. But you and I know that that's not always the way it goes. We know that this is something that we should do, but what we find is words just coming out of our mouth, and then we find ourselves in a position wishing we had this button right here. We wish we could go back and get those words back. We wish we could hit the rewind and do that. And so today, as we dive into this topic and we talk about my big fat mouth, right? In case this doesn't help you, in case what we talk about and we look at Scripture today, in case this whole thing and I just bomb it and I don't do a good job, I don't want to just leave you hanging out there. What I want to do is, if today the sermon doesn't help you, when you leave today, the host team is going to give you a gift. It's a great big roll of duct tape, and you can. So one way or the other, today we're going to try to find a remedy for the big fat mouth that so many of us have. You know, if you've been here for any length of time, typically when we begin a new series like we are today, a lot of times in that first week, what we're doing is we're really just kind of laying a foundation and putting it all out there. But what I want to do today is I want to go ahead and give you the main idea, like right up front. I'm going to give you the thing that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, because here's the deal. Like, I have found the antidote. I have found the cure for the big fat mouth disease. If you've ever had diarrhea of the mouth, today, listen, I've got your Malox, okay? You ready for this? All right, you ready? Here's the main idea. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Talk about diarrhea in the house. Today, one of the main ideas, the thing that I want you to get is this right here. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. Can we say that together? Be quick to listen and slow to speak. And so I want to do something a little bit fun, okay? I want to do something engaging. I need your help, okay? Everybody give me a good head nod. You're there with me? All right, good, good, good. I see some eyeballs, some heads nodding, okay. So what I want to do is I want to do what we do over in City Kids. I want to actually put some hand motions to this, okay? So I don't mean to embarrass you. I don't mean to make this silly. There's an illustration that goes alongside this. So what I need you to do right now, let's just go ahead and shake your arms out. Don't hit your neighbor. Shake your arms out. Oh, come on. Don't be too dignified. You're in church. Let's have some fun today. Shake your arms out. You guys look like you're flapping like a bird. Just shake a little bit, okay? All right. Now do the hokey pokey, and I'm just kidding. I'm making. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put some hand motions that go alongside this. Are you ready for this? Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and ball your fist up right here. Ball your fist up, right? All right, and then you're going to do a double jab, okay? So when we say this word right here, quick to listen, what I want you to do is I want you to just go ahead and thrust them out there, okay? Let's go ahead and practice one time. Boom! Throw that thing out there, yeah. I mean, leave it out there, though. Don't you punch. You guys are recoiling. You're ready to go and fight. I see how this is going to go. All right, here we go today. All right, so we got our arms out here, right here, all right? Here they are right now. Now what I need you to do is go ahead and turn them over like this, okay? Now your fists are all this way with me. Everybody's there with me. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So here's what we're going to do. Here's the hand motions. Here's how this is going to go. When we say quick to listen, what I want you to do is pop that hand open. Let's try it one time. Pop that hand open. Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so we're going to say quick to listen, and we're going to pop that hand open. And when we get to slow to speak, what we're going to do is we're going to go slow to speak. But you got to do this like you're truly from the South, okay? You got to put a good drawl on that thing. You got to say slow to speak, all right? You got that? All right, it's simple enough, all right? So you ready? Arms are back right here. And just for the sake of not punching anybody in the back of the head, here we go on 3. 1, 2, 3. Boom! Pop those things out there. Flip them over. All right, here you go. Here's the part right here. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Quick to listen. Man, you guys are fast. Okay, you ready? Here goes the next part. Slow to speak. Let's practice it a couple more times. Ready? Throw those hands out there. Flip them over one time. And quick to listen. Then slow to speak. Man, if we're looking for new kids team volunteers, you guys are pros. You could do this. You could train our kids. You could teach our kids. Now, why would we do something like this? Why? It's a little silly. It's a little fun, but it actually illustrates something, and I want us to be able to talk about this because this idea is going to run throughout this series, and it's going to mean the world to us as we consider what it looks like in our relationship context, in our dynamics of working with each other, sometimes the frictions that we face. And so this illustrates something. So let me ask you something. When does your big fat mouth get you in the most trouble? It's oftentimes when it's moving. Yes, there is some duct tape, bro. So our big fat mouth, it gets us into trouble more often than not when there's a little bit of tension, when there's a little bit of conflict, and that's when that thing just kind of starts to spew stuff out of it. Our big fat mouth gets us in trouble when we're in tension, when we're feeling conflict. And have you ever paid attention to this? And this is the illustration. Have you ever paid attention to what your mannerisms, what your body language, specifically, have you ever paid attention to what your hands do when you're in the middle of conflict? Some of you look like you've been there before. What do they do, right? Your hands, even if they're down by your side, even if they're sitting in your lap, what do? They begin to close up. And when this is closing up, this is actually symbolic of what's happening in your body, that you're kind of hardwired this way, of what's happening in the rest of your body as well. And so when you feel conflict, when you feel tension, when you feel that like it's just that blood's beginning to boil, and you're like, it's about to come out, it's about to come out, and that tension's there, and your hands are doing this, and they're beginning to draw up. You know what else is happening? Your mind is doing the same thing. Your mind is beginning to close itself off. You know what else happening? Your ears begin to close off. Something else that happens inside of this is your heart begins to shut down. Your ability to have compassion or empathy for another individual begins to close itself off. And so when there's tension, when there's conflict, our natural place, our natural reaction, and just watch it next time, you'll notice your hands begin to close themselves off and make fists out of themselves. Have any of you ever heard of a guy named Bob Goff, and he wrote a book named Love Does? It's pretty popular in culture. Any of you ever read that? So it's a great book. And one of the things that Bob Goff does is he's a lawyer, and he goes into this little illustration. And as he puts someone on the witness stand, he says, this is what I do to prepare them. I tell them to sit with their palms facing up, resting on their knees. Why? Because when they're being antagonized by someone who is questioning them, it is much harder for them to become defensive, for them to get frustrated, for them to become upset with their palms facing up. And so I love this quote that he says here, and let me just read it to you. He says, "There's something about the hardwiring that God gave each of us that links the position of our bodies and the position of our hearts. Palms up means you have nothing to hide and nothing to gain or to lose. Palms up means you are strong enough to be vulnerable even with your enemies, even when you have been tremendously wrong." And I love this as he ends it. Jesus was palms up all the time to the very end. So let's do this one more time. You ready? Okay, we're going to go back through our thing. Ready? Get your fists like this and thrust them out. Flip them over one time. And quick to listen and slow to speak. And when we're in conflict with each other, and no life is without conflict, no relationship is without conflict, when we're in conflict with one another, did you know, and this is interesting, did you know that we all want the same thing? We all have the same objective. We all have the same thing that we desire out of it. We all have the same goal. And that goal is to be heard. And not only do I want to be heard, I also want to be understood. And so in the heart of every conflict, every time that we're in the middle of those most tense moments, you can be convinced of this idea that while we may not agree, while we may not see eye to eye, where we may not agree in that moment of how we're to parent or what discipline should look like in the home, maybe we're not in agreement of what's going to happen with our finances, or not in agreement with a colleague or a coworker or the boss, the decision that needs to be made on the job site. Maybe we're not in agreement, those of you who are in college students, Chloe, maybe we're not in agreement of what major that I'm going to have in school. And so maybe there's not an agreement between whether that guy is right or that girl is right for you. And sometimes there's just these moments where I just want to be heard and I just want to be understood, even if we don't agree, even if we never come to the position of agreement. Have you noticed this thing that happens in all of our conflicts? It's that we're really trying to get to that place of just being heard. And so what starts as conversation, right? It's civil, and we're having conversation. And then comes that moment when I feel like, you're not hearing me. And what do? My voice gets a little bit louder, right? And then what happens to their voice? Well, it matches yours. Oh, they're going to trump yours. Why? Because they want to be heard, and you're not hearing them. And then it escalates. And so conflict begins to grow, it begins to boil, and it begins to surface itself because of this idea that we want the same goal. We want to be heard, and we want to be understood. And so as we're talking about this conflict in relationships, today this is going to help you as we talk about this idea of be quick to listen and slow to speak. Quick to listen and slow to speak. And what my hope is that for you, maybe you're sitting in the boardroom and your hands are up underneath, but you feel it in that disagreement, and you feel your hands are like this, that you would maybe do that. Maybe it's at the dinner table and the kids are misbehaving and it's going crazy, because that's the stage of life that I'm at right now. And maybe it's like, I'm going to be reminded, and I'm going to have my hands open, my palms facing up. And so you may recognize this idea. So this wasn't original to me. I didn't come up with this. In fact, we kind of have ripped this off from a very famous guy. We ripped it off from a guy who was found in the New Testament. And if you grew up around Sunday school, or you memorized some scripture as a kid, or you've been to church before, you've probably heard this idea before. It comes from a guy named James. Do you know who James was related to? Does anybody know? Yeah. James was Jesus' brother. Well, his half-brother, if we're going to be technical about it, right? But James was Jesus' brother. And can you imagine? I mean, how awkward would that be? How crazy would that be, right? Can you imagine growing up in Jesus' shadow? Can you imagine being in James's position? In fact, we don't see a whole lot about James until after Jesus had died. And if you're like me, when you read Scripture, it's always like, well, why? Why didn't James show up? And I'm just guessing here, but can you imagine how you would feel if your big brother was, hey, I'm the Son of God. Shh, don't tell anyone. I'm the Son of God. Can you imagine how you would feel? How many of you have siblings? How many of you have a big brother? Okay. Can you imagine how you would feel about that person? You might think, oh, yeah, see, there's Joseph, there's Mary, there's me and you. Like, listen, bro, I hear what you're saying, but... And so James doesn't even show up until after Jesus died. What happened? Something miraculous happened that completely changed James from the inside. It changed everything about him, changed everything that he believed about his older brother. And see, he and Mary, his mother, were there when Jesus was put on the cross and he was crucified. He was there when Jesus was put in that tomb, and he probably wept alongside his mother. But then something happens. What happened? What happened? The resurrection. Jesus was raised from the dead. He was raised from the grave. And how many of you know that in that moment that he was convinced that there was no denying it, there was no doubting it, even if he had maybe seen that water turn to wine, maybe he had some questions, but the moment that Jesus was raised from the dead, it changed everything for James. And so James actually becomes one of the first leaders of the church. So Jesus was crucified in the city of Jerusalem. Yes, in the city of Jerusalem. So he was crucified there. And then on goes this place where he is going to become one of the first leaders in that church. And so James develops a reputation. He becomes known as James the Just. James the Just. And so James actually experiences this unfortunate ending to his life because he was so convinced of who his brother actually was. He becomes kind of walking around in the city telling everybody about Jesus, about this belief system that he has, and he made some religious leaders pretty upset during that time. And so what did they do? We don't find this in the New Testament. We find this in historical documents that support this idea that James himself was actually, because of his conviction, because of what he believed about his brother, was taken and he was stoned and he was thrown rocks at. He was persecuted, and it ultimately led to, you'll catch up in a second. It ultimately led to his death, right? And that's how James goes out. But before he ever dies, before he's stoned, he writes this letter. And he writes a letter to the church, and he's talking to the church there and for the people here, and he says to them this as he begins his place in James chapter 1. And this is where we get this idea from, and this is what I want us to be able to talk about, okay? He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this." He says, listen, I need you to stop what you're doing. I need you to pay attention because I have something important to say, something that you need to know. So stop what you're doing, pay attention. You might want to write this down, take notes. This is what he's going to get ready to set up for us. He continues talking here. He says, everyone, who? Everyone, meaning everyone that he's talking to that's a part of that church, a part of that community. But guess what? It transcends the time and space, and it applies to you and I today. He says everyone should be quick to listen. He says everyone should be quick to listen, and this is that idea that we got for the hand motions, right? Everyone should be quick to listen, and you read this, and it's like, okay, James, that doesn't really make sense. Like, how can I be quick to listen? How can I speed up my hearing? Is that possible? Now, James, being the good communicator that he is, he's actually pairing some foreign ideas together to kind of drive home his point. He says, listen, in all of the relationships that you have and all of the conversations that you have, and every tension and every dynamic and every time there's an opportunity for an argument or something to be going on, you need to be quick to listen, meaning that you need to make it the priority. It needs to be the top agenda in those conversations. And the reality is, isn't this what we want? We want this from other people. In the conversations with others, have you ever been a part of a conversation with someone with all they did was truly the big fat mouth that just keeps on running and keeps on running? What about in conflict? Have you ever been in a conflict with someone and they just won't stop for a moment? They just keep pouring it out there and pouring it out there. And so we want others to do this for us. And I think James, in this moment, he's borrowing an idea from his big brother. I think he's borrowing an idea from the golden rule. You remember the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so James says to us, do you want other people to listen to you? Do you want to be heard? Well, yeah. Do you want to be understood? Well, yeah. Then you need to do this. You need to be very quick to listen. And so he continues on. Everyone should be quick to listen, and they should be slow to speak. Slow to speak. And this idea here, when he starts talking about being slow to speak, it's literally like in the middle of conversation that you should wait and be late. Like, it shouldn't be about how do I get in my word? How do I get this in there? That he says that my responsibility is that I should be slow to speak, that I should wait and be late. And so when it is time, when there is that moment that you feel like, okay, now's the time. And not just because you were just listening and waiting for that break so that you can interject your ideas, because you've been a part of conversations with that person too, right? Instead of doing that, when it is your time to speak, then I would kind of add this, and I think the other context of the scripture teaches us this, is that when it's our turn, we should actually do what this little guy does, and that we should be curious. Meaning that we should be slow to speak, and when we speak, we should ask questions. We should investigate. We should get a better feel for where they're at. And you say, well, Pastor Daniel, come on. If I ask questions, I mean, they're already, if I ask questions, you know what they're going to do? Keep going on and on and on and on again. And so when we're in conflict, we need to be curious. We need to investigate. We need to be asking questions. And so what is our responsibility? What is the responsibility in the conflict? We've already said them. We should be quick to listen, and we should be, that's our responsibility in our conversations, in our dialogues, in our places of conflict that we have with one another. So he says everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. And what this does for us is it sets us up in a position where the quicker that you are slow to speak, or the quicker you are to listen, the more you learn. The quicker you are to listen, the more you're going to learn about the people that you're in dialogue with, the conversations, the tension in that moment. And I'll tell you that this is a difficult thing to put into practice. If you've been in conflict, especially like for me, like words and language and communication, I want to get my point, I want to make my point. This is a difficult thing, and I'll tell you that my biggest gaps, my biggest relationship fail moments are when I was not quick to listen, when I was not slow to speak. You know, I think back when I was a teenager with my mom, like this was not something, I know it all and I'm right. I mean, come on, you've been around teenagers before, right? I was definitely the epitome of that, and then had that big fat mouth to go alongside it, and so I had some moments where I wish I could hit that rewind button. And so some of the greatest failures for me in relationship context when I was just letting that mouth run. And other places, maybe it was when, as a husband, and I try to be better about this, but there are definitely places when, tension's there, and it's beginning to rise, and the voice gets elevated, and thankfully we're not throwing things or breaking things in the house, but there are those moments when you have to make a decision. What am I going to do? How am I going to respond? And parenting, raising children, that's a whole nother can, isn't it? This is one of those moments that can really, for us, our worst parenting moments are when we do the dad thing, when we do the mom thing, and it, however it plays out for you if you have children or have raised children. For me, it's like, listen, I've got the age, I've got the experience, I've got the wisdom, I have the insight. You don't even have like frontal lobe development yet. I know. You don't know, and you should stop talking, and you should listen to me now. Right? Don't look at me like I'm the only one that's... Stop talking and listen to what I have to say. You know what happens eventually? And this is the problem. We get what we wanted, and they stop talking. And then we come to those places and we wonder, why don't they talk to me about what they're going through? And if you've got younger children, maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't. If those of you who have older children, maybe you've experienced something like this. So what happens in those relationships is we begin pushing this idea, and this isn't just for our children. You want to learn how to close off those people that are closest to you? And mannerisms that imply this idea of stop talking. I have something to say, and what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. And see what happens. Husbands, you need to know this. Wives, you need to know this. Those of you who are bosses and have employees, you need to know this. You want to close off communication in the relationship? Be dogmatic about it like this. See, you can be right for my children. I do have the experience. I do have the age. I have walked through it. I do have more wisdom. I can be absolutely 100% right and still be wrong and still do wrong. And the way that I approach that, how? Well, James tells us it's because you have a big, fat mouth. And so he keeps talking here, and he says, everyone should be quick to listen and be slow to speak. And if you get this part down and you get to this, then this next part becomes a lot easier for you. He says, slow to speak and slow to become angry. Slow to become angry. And see, here's what happens is this first part is both a result of and also a decision. That if I would be slow to speak, quick to listen, then as a result, I will also be in a position where I will become slow to be angry. And again, think about your conflicts. Think about the way this goes. Think about the way that you handle conflicts, the way that was handled with you younger. And we've talked a bit about this before. We all have different ways of processing our anger, right? We've talked about it, and I think we use the language of some of us, we just spew, right? We're like a volcano. That thing is just, boom, magnet up underneath, and boom, that stuff is just coming out. And then some of us are like, we just stew, right? It just kind of sits on the inside. I used to be the spewer. And now I've become more of the stewer, and I'm embarrassed to even say this. So with the way that I handle this right now is that I just kind of internalize it, and I just let it sit. And you know what it does? I become pretty moody. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, this is my mother over here, if you don't know. She just said, yes, you do, son. Yes, you do. Oh, yeah, uh-huh. I don't know what you're going to do with that, right? And so don't amen from the back over there if I got both of you tagged. So what happens is, right, like, it's like, you know, I'm angry, I'm upset, something has bothered me, and now I'm going to internalize it, and it's sitting within me, and so I become moody. I'm just dragging through, and she does the thing. Hey, Daniel, what's wrong? Nothing. Nothing's wrong, until it keeps going and keeps pressing. It sounds a little bit like a woman. I'm sorry. I know that we all kind of, I don't mean to offend you either, ladies. All right, foot in mouth. Hit rewind back there, please. So we all have different ways of processing our anger. It all comes out in different ways. Some of us stew, some of us spew. And so as we go through, listen, James is saying a lot to us, that if you would be quick to listen and slow to speak, you're more inclined to be slower to become angry. And so really what he's doing is he's giving us a formula. He's kind of setting this thing up, right? He's telling you, like, listen, you got big fat mouth disease. Here's part of the cure. The longer you listen, the more you'll learn, and the less angry you'll be. The longer you listen, the more you'll learn, and the less angry that you will be. And I'm going to do like a Captain Obvious moment for a second. Okay, let me put on my cap. All right, here we go. Captain Obvious is here today. The next thing that I want to share with you, it's like so obvious that it's like, well, duh, why did I get up and get myself dressed and come into church today? This next thing is so obvious, but sometimes we need to be reminded of the obvious and put it back in the forefront because we don't think about it, especially when it comes to relational conflict. And here's what it is. Here's why it's so obvious. You're going to see how this is super deep. I hope you're ready for this. Everything everyone does makes sense to them. Say, thank you, Captain Obvious. Okay. Everything everyone does makes sense to them. And it gets worse, okay? Here you go. Everything everyone says makes sense to them. Everything everyone believes makes sense to them. Did you know that? You knew that, right? But sometimes we forget this because what happens is in conflict when the relationship is like, right? When this happens, we're left in this position where we're like, I don't know why and maybe we think it to ourselves. We think to ourselves. Maybe we go and we talk to someone else about it, but we find ourselves in this position where I don't know why they do that. Excuse me. I don't know why they do that. I don't know why they say that. I don't know why they believe that. Why in the world? Can I ask you a question? Who is it that needs the education in this moment? I don't know, therefore you're the one who needs to be educated on this right here. Now this is going to be obvious, but I would beg to say that you probably have a gap between what you live out and practice in your relationships when it comes to this. I don't know why. And so maybe for you, that in those relationships, it's just easier to be critical. It's just easier to look at that thing and say, you know what? I don't know why they do that. I don't know why they say that. I don't know why she believes that. I don't know why my husband responds that way. I don't know why my daughter acts that way. It's easier for us to be critical, especially against other people groups and other people that we just don't understand or we don't know their position or where they're coming from. It's easier for to point it out and say, why would they not think like I think? Why would they not believe like I believe? Why would they not do like I think they should do? Because I'm right and you're wrong. And so we become critical in those moments. And we take this into the relationships and the conflicts with the people that aren't just far off from us, but are in the closest, oftentimes even in our own households. We don't get it, we don't understand, and so now we're in this position. I don't know why they would do that. I don't know why they would say that. It makes perfect sense to them. It makes perfect sense to them, just like it makes perfect sense to you why you think the way you do, why you believe in your heart the way you do, why you act certain ways. It makes sense to you. Newsflash, there are other people asking questions why you do what you do. And yet in these moments, we go and we position ourselves to become critical of them instead of being like, oh, Curious George, and asking questions about them. Instead of positioning ourselves to be quick to listen and slow to speak, we become judgmental and critical of them instead of positioning ourselves to listen and to learn. And this is, I'm telling you, this is just something that I have struggled with in my life, but this is something that I try to do. I'm trying to be in this position where if I don't understand it, instead of being in the position of being critical, I would ask questions and not make declarations. If there's something you don't understand, it requires questions and not declarations. Years ago, I read a book, and it's been around for a couple decades now. Any of you read this book here? It's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Some of you have read this, okay? This goes around, good, wonderful. This goes around leadership circles all the time. It's a great book if you haven't read it, if you like that kind of thing. It's kind of thick, smaller print, but man, it's just packed with wisdom and nuggets, especially if you are responsible for leading other people. But there's something inside of here. There's something in here that Stephen Covey wrote, and when I read it, it really spoke to me, and it changed really how I engage relationships. And I mean this, like if I were to say there's 10 phrases in all of my life that really changed, this is one that I really try to live out, and it has changed my dynamics in relationships. Don't get it perfect, but he says this, and this is the 5th practice that he says in his book. Let's say this together. 1, 2, 3. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's simple. That's a simple idea. But get in the thick of it and see how that really goes down. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, which means that we need to understand, which means we need to position ourselves to ask questions and to ask better questions rather than make assumptions or declarations that we know best and that we're right and they're not. And so trying to gain understanding. Did you know that every person that you ever encounter, that you ever have conflict with, including those that are in your household, and when I do marriage counseling, this comes up all the time, is that we all have a frame of reference. We all have a perspective. And so your frame of reference is determined by your age. It's determined by the household you grew up in, your upbringing, how your parents treated one another, that we all have this frame of reference, where I went to school, where I went to college, what my experiences were like. We all have that, and in conflict, we all see things. Everything that's coming at us, everything that's coming through is all filtered by my perspective. Have you ever said something to someone that offended them, you didn't mean to offend it? Chances are it was because of an experience that they had in the past, that was a trigger point for them, right? And so we all have that. And so what this is saying, and what James would say to us, is that when we're slow to speak and we're quick to listen, then we're actually positioning ourselves to ask questions, and we're trying to gain insight. We're trying to learn about their perspective, about their framework. And so in those conflicts, in those moments, instead of just trying to make yourself known, to one-up the other one, you're trying to position yourself to ask the questions and to gain understanding. So James continues here. And he says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And he's not done here. And he says, because, and he lays this out, like this isn't just self-help. This isn't just about relational conflict here. This isn't just about becoming unified again. That there's something way more important here. And James says there's actually something divine behind it. And here's what he says in verse 20. He says, because human anger does not produce the human anger, that frustration, that thing, that volcano that's on the inside, when you're not seeing it my way, that my needs are not being met, that when we have differing opinions and now I'm becoming angry, my human anger does not produce within me or the relationship a righteousness that God desires. I need to think about something. Did you know that there are 3 agendas in every conflict? The first one's pretty obvious. This is my agenda. This is your agenda. Then there's one on the other side. There's the other person's agenda. And what we're both trying to do is we're both going back and forth, and we're trying to prove our point. I'm right. No, I'm right. I'm right. No, I'm right. And this thing happens within us. And yet there's a third agenda in all of this, and that's God's agenda for our relationship. And so I'm trying to prove my rightness. Let's use the church word, the Bible word, my righteousness, my self-righteousness. Have you ever met self-righteous before? They're trying to prove their rightness, their self-righteousness. And this anger when I'm not getting my way, when you don't see it my way, when you have a differing opinion, this thing that grows within me and often comes out of me, it does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And so I want you to know that I'm right. I want everybody around me to know that I'm right. And James says to us, that's the wrong kind of right. And so the tension that sits in the heart of any of our conflicts, okay, is that you want to be right at each other, and God wants you to be right with each other. In your arguments, let me ask you a question. Even if you win the argument, what do you get as a result? No trophy, no prize. Hey, I won the argument. Hey, it went well. I finally got her. I bested her in that one. I proved I was the right one. Oh, good for you. Where's she at? Oh, I don't know. She bounced. She left. And so you can win the argument, and you can lose the relationship. You can be right, and you can do wrong. And so James would tell us that's not the kind of righteousness that God desires, not what he has for you. It's not about being right at each other. It's about being right with each other. Think about this for a moment, right? So when Jesus came, right? Jesus, his mission and his purpose was to not come and to be right. If Jesus came And his goal simply was to prove that he is right. He could have sat everybody down on that hillside on the Sermon on the Mount. He could have laid it out there in about 30 minutes, and he could have said, okay, I'm right, you're doing it wrong, peace out, I'll see you later. You saw Jesus going, peace out? That wasn't what Jesus did, was it? No, it wasn't about being right. It was about making things right in relationship. That when God came through Jesus, that his goal was to reconcile you and me in relationship with him and one another. Then when Jesus came and the Pharisees pressed him and they pushed on him, and he says, Jesus, can you boil it all down? Could you simplify it for us? He says, well, I'll give you one. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Number 2, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Another place in Scripture we find where Jesus is pressed again and he simplifies and he says, a new command I give you. As I have loved you, so you are to love one another. It's not about being right. It's about being reconciled. And so Jesus lays this out to us very clearly. And let me help you, okay? Let me help you in any conflict that you're going to face. When the challenges come, as a Christ follower, if you are a Christian, your mission, your purpose is not to make yourself right. It's to do what Jesus modeled for us. And it's to reconcile the relationship. And how do we do it? It's pretty simple. We're only covering a couple verses today. It's pretty simple. James tells us, be quick to listen and slow to speak. If the two of you aren't right relationally, it doesn't matter who is right. You don't win a relationship argument. Let me, over the next couple minutes, let me bring it all together here. So James, he continues talking and he says, therefore, now that you've got all of this other stuff, now that you understand, now that you know how the anger goes, now that you know what God expects in the rightness of relationship, therefore, I want you to get rid of. He says, get rid of, and this in the Greek, this is this idea. It's like you're wearing a cloak, you're wearing a jacket, you're wearing a coat, and it's like you've walked into the house. Hey, welcome, I'm so glad that you're here. Can I get your coat for you? Let me take that coat off, and you know what? Let's go put it over here. Instead of putting it where they're going to put it back on when they leave, we take it out back and we burn it, right? It's this idea of get rid of, take that thing off. You've been wrapped in this idea that I want to be right. I want to prove that I'm right. There's something inside of me that must be right. And James comes and says, you need to get rid of that thing. You need to get rid of that evil, that moral filth. And when he starts talking about that moral filth, this is in context, this is whole that idea of self-righteousness. And you know what happens with self-righteousness? Pride begins to grow on the inside of us. I've got to be right. And pride and ego on the inside of us. And he says, get rid of all of that moral filth and that evil. And this evil could be like this word malice, which just means like, I'm going to get even with you. I'm going to one-up you. I'm going to make this thing happen that's so prevalent in our culture around us, so prevalent even within our homes, that when conflict rises, that this kind of evil, that there's malicious behind it, that sometimes the pride that is still cloaked on around us. And he goes on to say this. Next slide. Therefore, get rid of all of this stuff and humbly, right? So you're going to exchange this cloak. You're going to get rid of this one. And guess what you're going to do? You're going to put on another cloak of humility. And you're going to wrap that thing around you. And this is the way that you are to engage every relationship around you. That in humility, humbly accept the word that was planted within you. And again, if you're a Christ follower, in this moment, they didn't have all of the Gospels that were written out. This isn't just like, oh, I got the New Testament that's in. This is this idea. This is that conviction that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was raised again. And because of that, I've put my faith and my hope inside of him. And I'm so convinced that there is a word, a conviction that burns deep within me that changes everything around me and every relationship around me. that we would, in humility, that we would put on humility, and that we would accept this word that has been planted within us. And so humility says, we are more important than me. What we have, what my wife and I have, what my children and I have, what you and I have, what you have with your boss, with your colleague, your coworker, what you have in humility, it says, we are more important than me. That I would actually consider you, elevate you, lift you up even above my own needs. Humility says that the relationship is what needs to be right. And he goes on and he begins wrapping up this idea. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can, next slide, which can save you. That word, that conviction, that thing inside of you. And yes, he is speaking about this idea of eternal life. He can save you. It saves you. It's the conviction in your hope in Jesus Christ that saves you. But this isn't just for the future. This is about a here and now. See, this idea that James has been talking about, this conviction, this way of living, it has the ability to save us here and now. That it can save you from having big mouth disease. It can save you from acting out in anger. It can save you from spewing out words that you'll later regret. Save you from having to apologize time and time again. It can save your relationship with your coworker. It can save your son or your daughter and the relationship that you have with them. It can save your marriage. It can save you from divorce. And I'm convinced of this. I've walked through this. I know some that are still walking through this idea. The way that we do this, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. If we would position ourselves to seek first, to understand, why is it that you feel that way? Why do you respond that way? Why does this upset you? Why do you feel this? And we would position ourselves to be curious and to ask better questions. Then the other person who is in that party, they feel like you actually care, that you give a rip, that you have heard them, and that you understood them. Instead of making your point, instead of making it about all of the solutions that you know are right, position yourself to ask questions. Tell me about this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I've made you feel this way or that you responded that way. Can you help me understand what this does on the inside? That's not what I wanted. And the reality is it was a lack of understanding on your part. You didn't get it, and so they got it. And so when we humble ourselves and we take off, isn't it unfortunate that evil shows up in the middle of our marriages and our conflict? That we would take that thing off and that we would get rid of that and that we would put on humility and we would actually do, as it talks about in Ephesians 5, that we would submit to one another, that we would love one another, that we would honor one another. If we would do that, what would it do inside of our relationship? And now I get that there are two parties in this. I get it. There's two agendas in it, and I get it. But as best as it is up to you, you position yourself this way. And then you pray and you see what God does. So James teaches us, don't settle for being right. Make things right. Don't make it about your big fat mouth. And so let's do this one more time. Go ahead and get your hands out. Let's go ahead and put them out here in the thrust position. Flip them over this way. You ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. Before we close, I want to share how this has been played out and modeled for us. That God, through Jesus, did what we're talking about today. That he was quick to listen and he was slow to speak. Don't check out on me because this is good. I want you to think about when Jesus was sent to the earth. You would think that he would have come as a teacher, a prophet. You would think that he would have come to assert his authority, to make things right, to put people in their place. But instead, in God's great plan, he says, I'm going to send him as one who cannot speak. He sent him as a baby who was speechless. Then for 30 years, 0 to age 30, all he did was listen. All he did was position himself to identify. So he began to experience pain and loss. And he positions himself where he was listening and gaining understanding. And so at the end of that 30 years, something happens. He begins to speak in that moment. And do you know why the crowd scattered? Do you know why they came and they sat and all the people at the Sermon on the Mount? Do you know why they were all there? Because here was a guy who understood them. He understood. And then because he had listened, because he had learned, because he had insight, then when he opened his mouth and spoke, Scripture tells us in the Gospels that those who were around him began to listen and say, well, who is this? God, who was slow to speak, he was quick to listen, understands. Maybe you're in the thick of it. Maybe you're having relationship dynamics. Maybe this is something that is close to home. If not, there will be days when you can apply these ideas. Maybe what you've experienced in life, and you say, well, you come here today, and Pastor Daniel, I'm coming into the church, and I have more questions than I have answers. I understand that too. But more importantly, you have a God who understands right where you are, right where you're. Have done differently, that if you had lived the right way, that you wouldn't experience that. It is not who he is. It is by his compassion that he draws you to himself. It is by his love and his grace that you are restored and you are reconciled and you are made right with him. And so this is the invitation that Jesus presents to all of us. Those of us who are Christ followers, the invitation is that we follow the model that was laid out for us. That it's not about me being right. It's about us being reconciled. Those of us who are not believers, those of us who walked with Jesus maybe a long time ago, who had a relationship, but did a lot of wrong things along the way, didn't get it right. You have one who understands and knows right where you are. In just a moment, I'm going to ask everybody in here to bow our heads and to close our eyes. And in this moment, I'm going to pray for those who are believers, that we would have the courage in the thick of it, when we feel the hands drawing up, pop them open. God, help me to live palms up. I'm going to pray for a second group of people. Those of us who felt like maybe we've drifted too far or things aren't where they need to be, I want to pray for you today. Now, I can't pray for you and make everything right. This is something for you in your heart. But in that moment, I'll take the opportunity to lead you, to give you an example of what prayer looks like. And then that means in your heart, and maybe even out of your mouth, you begin to say, God, help me. Would you come? Would you change me?